And this marks the day that many of us have been waiting for. The Ronbus Quanta series enters the field as the first budget, true high-performing, legal Gen 4 paddle, free of risk of core crushing and without hurting your wallet. But don't let the price fool you, these paddles play just as good or better than paddles 2 to 3 times their price. I've got no doubt you're going to be hearing about these paddles unanimously hailed as the new overall best budget value paddle on the market. For folks who want an accelerated overall summary of our main takeaway points here, the Quanta paddles feature 3 separate types of foam with absolutely no honeycomb in their construction. They have 5 shapes to choose from, which I'll go over here shortly, all of which are incredibly light, both in terms of gross and swing weight. Overall, these paddles fall right around the middle of the power category for pop and drive velocity, and like most foam paddles I've tested so far, these paddles improve their performance greatly with some added weight. After this channel's discount code PBMED, the price of a Ronbus Quanta comes to $99, which is seriously a ridiculously good deal for the paddle you're getting here. I think Ronbus must have got sick of people talking about the high price of their previous Ripple, and they want to send a message to the market that they mean business. Well, message received. This is my running Gen 4 full foam price after discount list, which not only has the Quanta series 3 times cheaper than our highest cost Gen 4 paddle, but it's about half as expensive as the paddles in the mid-cost range and has a margin of over $50 from the previously most affordable Gen 4 paddle, the enhanced Gen 4.5. The naming of the paddles in this series is a bit confusing, and I'm not going to get into any rationale here, but I'll line this out here briefly. The R1 and R3 shapes are the 2 elongated models, with the R1 having a tapered face that's slightly wider at the top than the bottom, and it has those rounded top corners. Comparatively speaking, the R3 has a more classic rectangular shaped face. That's the same situation with the R2 and R5, which are both overall standard shapes, with the R5 having that tapered face and rounded top, and the R2 coming more classically square shaped. The R4 is the solo hybrid shaped paddle, which also has the face taper and the rounded top. All paddles in this series are 16mm thick, have a triple layer of carbon fiber face, and have really solid handles that technically measure 5.5 inches, but they all have a little bit of a taper at the bottom of the paddle face, allowing for more room for your hands, and the flared shapes in particular, which again are the R1, 4, and R5, have even more usable room at the bottom of the paddle face and can fit 2 hands a little more comfortably. And just on a quick note for handles here, one complaint people had about the Ronbus Ripples was the squishy inserts they used in the handle, which have now been replaced with more solid inserts and feel a lot better. I'll enter the nerdy portion of the video now, starting with the measured specs I'll put on the screen, and since there's 5 total paddles, I won't go through them all, but I'll highlight the things I think are the most important takeaways here. Firstly, looking at static weight, these paddles all came in the 7.6 to 7.7 ounce range, with the average weight of most other paddles on the market coming somewhere around 8 ounces. Secondly, the swing weights of each of these models is crazy low, especially for their given shapes. Even the highest one, which was my elongated R3, was roughly 10 points lower than the average swing weight for an elongated shaped paddle. Not much to take away from the twist weights here. These are sort of middle of the road for foam paddles, and I think that does translate to an average level of stability among good all foam core paddles. We can take a look at the x-rays here to see some of the more unique construction components. First off, again, there is 0 honeycomb, even in the handle, and we've got several different foam types. The inner core is expanded polypropylene foam that extends through the handle, so technically this isn't a floating core, it's more of a peninsula or diving board shape. I will say one thing right now about feel so you don't get the wrong idea, and that's that even though this is a diving board shaped core, it doesn't have that same extra springy catapult-like effect up at the top like some Gen 3 diving board shaped paddles have. I think it's more of a consistent feel across the face for some reason, but just know that moving forward. In addition to the EPP foam center, it's also surrounded by a horseshoe of foam that's composed of EVA up top and TPE foam, or thermoplastic elastomer foam, inserted on the bottom corners. The idea with utilizing TPE in this way is that TPE is supposed to be more elastic and rubbery than EVA or EPP foam, thus creating more vibration reduction. TPE is also supposed to be a little bit more dense and heavy than those other foam types, thus helping to increase the twist weight and stability more effectively. The ring you see around the edge of the paddle appears darker, not only because of the edge guard, but because they reinforce the edge of these paddles with a carbon fiber lattice, just like the one you see here in this Ripple, which adds a little bit of edge stability and a little more of that springy type effect to the face. For the actual gameplay and performance portion, I'll get out ahead of this and lead with the pros and cons of the shape-related differences. Like most paddle shapes, as you move from the standard shape to the hybrid shape, and then finally to the elongated shape, power on drives goes up and sweet spot size and stability goes down. If you look at the flared shapes versus the square ones head-to-head, which are the standard R2 versus the standard R5, and the elongated R1 versus the elongated R3, the flared R1 and R5 will have higher centers of gravity and sweet spots located higher up on the paddle face, and they'll also have more room for two hands on their handles. The more square R2 and R3 will have slightly larger sweet spots located lower on the paddle face, and the square shapes will have a little more surface area overall on their faces, which seems to give them just a touch more plow-through power on drives. Aside from those things, one big difference I felt was that, for whatever reason, the square-shaped paddles felt more springy and more loose, in a good way, when compared to the flare shapes. I'm sure physics can explain this somehow, but I'll just say that, out of the box, the square R2 and R3 felt more lively and powerful, and the elongated R3 was easily my most favorite of all the paddles in this series. For overall play category, I put these paddles in the middle of the power category. Jive speed is nice, and the pedals actually have a really pleasant feel to them with a strong but not overwhelming pop. One knock on foam core paddles and why I think a lot of people haven't transitioned to foam yet is that a number of foam core paddles just lack a good feel. Some people like it or grow to like it, but paddles like the Carbon True Foam, the Diadem Blue Core, or even the previous Ronbus Refoam have this sorta muted bleh feel to them. The Quantas, however, actually have a good feel on ball impact, and you can feel the ball hit the face and sort of compress and recoil to a small degree. To describe this compression in relative terms of feel, not necessarily for power, if the Yola Mod or the Luz Cannon are large, commercial, business-sized trampolines, and the Honolulu FC Plus and Bread and Butter Foam Loco are outdoor residential trampolines, the flared R1, R4, and R5 shaped Ronbus Quantas are like those small trampolines you can have inside your house, and the square-shaped R2 and R3 Quantas are somewhere in between the small indoor and the residential outdoor trampolines. I also felt like these paddles played very consistently overall. The effort I put into swings compared to the resultant ball velocity off the face was more close to linear than exponential, which made it relatively easy to place drops and dinks where I intended. Resets were also pretty consistent, and the consistent feel across the face made resets out of the air, and deke volleys in particular, a little bit easier to hit. In terms of stability and sweet spot, out of the box I would say they were somewhere around average. Without weight, I did notice some twisting here and there, so I was glad these paddles were light enough to allow for a lot of customizability however I wanted to do that. I'm more and more experiencing that most foam core paddles play and feel significantly better with added weight at the perimeter, which is probably why Selkirk manufactures their new Boomstik with weights already adhered to the outside, and these paddles are no different. I've also found that the best setup for me on most foam paddles, including the Quantas, is to get a little weight around all four corners, at the very least. Weight at the bottom corners usually helps sufficiently for twisting, but a little weight around the top corners helps stabilize shots off the end of the paddle and also brings the sweet spot up on the paddle face a little bit. For the Quantas, this greatly helps with power, pop, sweet spot size, and gives it a little extra plow-through power and springy feel. And if I use the R1 as a comparison paddle to some of the other paddles I've been hitting lately, here's where it stacks up in terms of pop and power. Without any added weight on side-by-side comparisons, I put the R1 Quanta right above the Honolulu J2NF and right below the Yola Pro 4 Perseus for both pop and power, putting it right in the middle of the power category. The thing to remember here is that the R1 has the lowest swing weight and the lowest static weight of any of the paddles on this list, as do the rest of the Quanta shapes, and they have the most room for customizability and potential for moving up this list with however much weight you want to add if you're searching for higher pop and power. Going a little deeper with some direct comparisons people may want to know about, using the R1 shape as my comparison unit specifically, head-to-head with the J2NF, the NF has higher out-of-the-box stability and sweet spot size, but the Quanta gets a very slight edge for pop, power, and obviously price. I give the Bread and Butter Loco a slight edge for sweet spot and stability, and the Loco also hits just a little bit harder, but the Quanta edges it out on maneuverability, has more room for customizability, and is obviously, again, cheaper. Compared to the Boomstik and Flik F1, both of those get the nod over the Quanta for pop and power, but the Quanta is much easier to control, is more maneuverable, and literally just crushes the Boomstik on price, and is still $70 cheaper than the Flik. As I mentioned before, I like the square elongated R3 shape the most of all these paddles. For an elongated paddle, it's very light, highly maneuverable, and had good but controllable pop and power. It also feels a little more springy and has a slightly more pleasant feel than the flared R1 and R4 shapes do, and because of the R3's existence, I didn't like those paddles quite as much. Some others may like those shapes better, however, if they want more room for two hands or want a slightly higher sweet spot location, and I actually really liked the flared standard shaped R5. For a standard shaped paddle, I didn't feel like I was playing with a short paddle because of the tapered face and the feel of a longer handle with the higher sweet spot location. The standard square shaped R2 had more of that classic standard shaped feel to me, if that makes sense, and like the square R3, it also had that feel of a bit more springiness than its flared R5 counterpart. Overall, these are truly an awesome deal, but there may be a couple types of people in particular who may not enjoy these paddles. One group of people may be those who want to paddle at the absolute top of either pop or power. Those top few spots right now include the GX2 Power, the Boomstik, and the Flik F1. And another group of people may be those who want a super large sweet spot out of the box. These Quantas actually aren't bad and improve a lot with weight too, but a couple of the leaders in that department are the Honolulu J2s and the B&B Locos. And there you have it, that's my take on the new Ronbus Quantas. Clearly, I think these are some of the best and probably the single #1 overall best value paddle currently on the market. I hope the review was helpful. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll catch you here for the next one.